Hi, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Johns Hopkins with Baltimore Heritage, and welcome to our partnership with the Baltimore Architecture Foundation. Nathan Denny's is here driving the Zoom ship. Haha, you'll see why later. We have a real captain with us today. But for the Baltimore Architecture Foundation and Baltimore Heritage, I want to say thanks for joining us. And also thanks to all of you who have donated whatever amount. We really appreciate it. A sincere thank you to that. Before introducing our today's speaker, I just want to announce we've got two more lined up, two more virtual histories on Friday afternoons lined up. Next week, and let me make sure I get the dates right, that's August 7th. We've got Charlie Duff speaking about the row house as classical architecture. So if you tuned in, Charlie's spoken once before on our series, but it's not going to be the same talk. So stay tuned for that. And then the week after that, August 14th, we've got Jackson Gilman Forlini talking about how the suffragists built Baltimore's first recreation center. So both promise to be good talks. And I'll just say one more housekeeping matter. If you have questions, please put them in the chat box, the little chat box on the bottom of your screen, and we'll get to those. I know our speaker today is eager to have as much of a conversation as a unidirectional talk. So please put as many questions as you want or can in the box. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Captain Jan Miles, who is the captain of the Pride of Baltimore II, and has been there for several years. And we are all looking forward to learning a little bit of history of the Pride and also what's going on today. So Captain Miles, thanks so much. I will hand the virtual baton or the virtual microphone over to you.
Here we have a modern view of the city of Baltimore and Pride of Baltimore II sailing in the harbor. Go to the next slide. Back in the 70s, a lot of industry existed in the inner harbor. And you see the first Pride of Baltimore sailing near Fells Point. And then next slide. That vessel, Pride of Baltimore, was built during the year of 1976, started sailing in 1977. And the reason being, next slide, there was this incredible history coming out of Baltimore, starting in the 1600s, but culminating in an explosive appearance on the worldwide scene during the 1812 war. Baltimore schooners were very nimble, and they became nimble for the purposes of security, protection of the cargo by being able to run away from threat. So privateers, pirates, a lot of different nations in the Caribbean. There was a lot of trade going on between the Chesapeake Bay and the Caribbean. And so being nimble, but that nimbleness, that agility became a device for the protection of the country, the prosecution of the 1812 war. Private citizens who were willing to take the risk, invest in these vessels, take the time to go on these vessels at great risk for profit, was a licensed process out of the US government. Letters of marque and reprisal were issued, and Baltimore schooners, later dubbed Baltimore Privateer Clippers or Baltimore Clippers, it became well known around the world because of their success against the British Navy protecting commerce. American privateering caught many, many, many British commerce vessels, only the British, not just any commerce. The license was restrictive, and it was amazing profits to those who were successful, and it was surprisingly successful. Next slide. So everybody got involved. Our African American of the day were involved. It was a great risk. The most famous of the private Baltimore privateers is a vessel named the Chasseur. And she was commanded by a bold fellow by the name of Boyle. Captain Boyle not only went over to the English Channel all the way across the Atlantic, and he wasn't alone in doing this, but he had a special design to capture not only the English raiding near that area of the Atlantic, but also to create a paper blockade, which was an announcement that he had sufficient force to blockade all of England. And he used the words of the British admiral who blockaded the East Coast of the day. So this is embarrassing to the English. They chased him down and around. And this gentleman here, Roberts, is one of his crew who was described by Boyle as one of the braver, bold crew members. And this gentleman lived in Baltimore long after the war and participated in the remembrance marches in Baltimore. Go ahead, Patrick. So this is this is the first Pride of Baltimore, and this is a symbol that turned from being just in the Inner Harbor to being something that sailed far and wide. She went to the Caribbean and into the Great Lakes, the West Coast, and eventually to Europe. On the way back from Europe, she was lost at sea in a tragic but very violent microburst wind squall. Go ahead, Patrick. This is a depiction of what we mean by nimble. Notice the hull forms of a cargo boat versus the hull forms on the left of a sharp-built Chesapeake Bay schooner hull. The one on the right is very burdensome. The one on the left is narrow and slippery with a majestic rig, can outperform vessels a lot larger than she. Go ahead, Patrick. So this is the second Pride of Baltimore. You can see that shape. This vessel is somewhat bigger than the first Pride. Go ahead. And also carried the ambassador role representing the Renaissance of Baltimore, the presence of Maryland in a we're open for business mode, a lot of corporate use, a lot of government agency business development. Go ahead, Patrick. And overall, this is where Pride of Baltimore II has traveled. You'll notice she's been to Asia, and you'll notice she's been as far east as Russia and the Ukraine, and just about everywhere that counts in between. Go ahead. So Pride of Baltimore II and the whole Pride legacy of more than 4 decades is worldwide renowned. This is her at Pride of Baltimore II at home, as you can recognize the harbor scene with the Dutch vessel, the Clipper ship, which is an American creation, but in this case, modeled by the Dutch, a modern rendition called the Stad Amsterdam. Go ahead. And here we have a video of Pride of Baltimore II sailing. Go ahead, Pat. So we have a lot of motion. It's a robust sail. We have, it's an overnight sail. It's not a day sail. So we have some gear on deck that we were using at one point, but is now secure and idle on deck. The vessel's charging now at very much her maximum speed on a reach, not going to windward, not going downwind, but going across the wind. And this is a run between Charleston and Bermuda 2-3 years ago. So don't get seasick. So to be a nimble vessel, you're going to be close to the water. So Pride of Baltimore II is sailed by a crew of Americans from around the country. We continue to represent the United States, Maryland, and Baltimore everywhere she goes. Last year she was up in the Great Lakes and in Canada. And we're looking forward to getting out along the East Coast next year. Okay, Patrick. We can do a discussion, question and answer when we have a chance. Okay. How's that?
Great. Well, so thank you, Captain. I am gonna take a look at the chat box. And if you got a question, please type it in. While you're typing, I actually do have one question that I've never understood. And we hear the term clipper ship and we hear the term schooner. What's the difference? And like exactly what is a Baltimore clipper ship that I don't know. I'll stop there. What's the difference between a clipper ship and a schooner?
Well, back in the day, long ago, there were very specific meanings of words that describe the sailing vessel. So a ship is always a much bigger vessel as a general rule, always at least 3 masts, and all of the masts have square sails on them. Now, the U.S. Coast Guard bark Eagle is a bark, also generally a big vessel, has at least 3 masts, of which the aftermost mast is always fore and aft sails, no squares at all. So back in the day, in the age of sail, specific words meant very, very specific things in the larger class vessels. And you start getting down into the smaller class, schooners tend to be smaller, then schooners can involve a great deal of variety. So we go to the word hermaphrodite. So schooners tend to be fore and aft sail, like our Lady Maryland here in Baltimore is a classic bay type schooner, no squares at all. And then you saw some of the depictions in this presentation where you have both fore and aft sails and square sails in a mix. But the lowermost, or the lower of the fore and aft sails, are a much larger proportion. So it gets very confusing when you start getting into smaller vessels. But a clipper ship is meaning a ship-rigged vessel that is extraordinarily fast for its type. So it's a ship-rigged vessel, and we have a lot of history with ship-rigged vessels, 4-masted, 5-masted, German boats like the Passat. They're cargo boats, and while they're large and therefore pretty fast with enough wind, they're not as slippery as the Stad Amsterdam, which is an example of an American concept called clipper ship for fast freight, but in peacetime. So that idea of fast freight, regular delivery, just on time delivery started to grow through the clipper ship. But the idea of maximum sail, limited cargo for maximum speed was an idea that grew out of the Baltimore schooners as privateers. And there's quite a historical debate going on with the idea that the Baltimore people came up with the clipper ship through the Ann McKim, which is just a Baltimore schooner rigged up differently, versus New England, southern New England being the center of the idea of clipper ships. So there's a lot of back and forth about that. So clipper schooners would mean a fast schooner. Clipper ship means a fast square rigged ship that is a ship rigged square rig rather than a bark. But the word clipper can be used independently of the rig. So we today look back at that without this familiarity and we're totally confused. I grew up with it, so it's all right for me.
We might have to just refer to you when we get that question. All right, we're starting to get a bunch of other questions in here. First one is, how many people make up the crew?
Well, the Pride of Baltimore II, as was the first Pride when she started sailing, is crewed with 12 professional people who are paid to be making the commitment to be a steady 24/7 responsibility to the care and sailing of the ship. Now, we take turns, we do watch change. Well, when we're tied to the dock, we're not necessarily on duty during the night. But the 12 of us do the sailing, do the interpreting, do the maintenance, and the kind of skills we need are such that we draw from around the country. In the United States, as in other parts of the world, there's this interest in classical vessels, traditional workboat class vessels, sail training as an education form of development of youth, or in specific classrooms, because there's plenty to do on a sailboat, plenty of crew, make the work lighter. So that training is what we need as crew for Pride, because you don't take someone off the street, put them on the Pride of Baltimore, and it's just too intensive to teach them. So they need to come from other vessels to us. but we're 12. And then we have space on board for 6 people to pay for the opportunity of joining us as crew for certain voyages. But we also are Coast Guard certified for day sails, where we can have 35 guests on board for a number of hours, typically a 2-hour sail in a port, particularly in Baltimore. And we also have interpretation from the crew, not reenactment, just interpretation.
So, all right, got another one. What port in Russia did you visit, and what was remarkable about it?
Well, actually, I told a little bit of a fib. It was actually Leningrad during the time of the last year of the Soviet Union. It was back in 1991. Of course, we know that place now as St. Petersburg, as it reverted back to its original name. We were there for 4th of July in the middle of their high summer. So we had next to no darkness, because when you're that far north, the sun almost never sets. And the American Consul General made very, very persistent and use of celebrating the American 4th of July in Leningrad when he was Consul General, with the Pride of Baltimore up the river Neva, right alongside the Admiralty. So it was really quite interesting. The other port is Odessa, where Baltimore is a sister city with Odessa in Ukraine.
Oh, excellent. All right, we got a bunch more here. How is the maintenance and operation of the ship and its crew funded?
Yeah, that's a tricky one. And for the last 32 years of this vessel, it's been a variety of means and continues to be. There was a time when this vessel, the first vessel, started out as a city-owned boat. So the city ran it by itself for 2-3 years, but then realized it didn't have the skill sets for managing and prosecuting as successfully as they imagined it could be. So they leased the boat to a newly formed nonprofit called Pride of Baltimore Inc. that formed in 1980. And they figured out how to make it work. They made it work so well that when the first boat was lost in 1986, returning back from Europe, the general public wanted to have another Pride of Baltimore. So Pride of Baltimore Inc. worked out a conversation with the state government of the day and the city government of the day, and a combination of funds came together to replace the first boat that created the second boat. And then the nonprofit turned the boat over for ownership to the state, but then they leased it back to the nonprofit for operations. As you all can imagine, this stuff going on. State doesn't know how to run a sailboat, and didn't want to run a sailboat. So get the pros to do it. So Pride Inc. came back into the picture, and for the last 30 years have been running it. However, state ownership has changed. Back in 2010, there was starting in 2008 or 7, there was much discussion, and then eventually an agreement for Pride Inc. to own the boat solely. It's been a real struggle for the nonprofit by itself. There's been a wonderful response out of the general legislation in Maryland. Some grant money, actually a funding bill was voted on in 2018 for a 5-year assist of $500,000 a year. That's only 40% of the budget. So the nonprofit is very, very much still in a huge challenge to take care of the people's boat, the Marylanders' worldwide renowned ambassador and representation of several successes of creation of identity and preservation of the American identity and sense of place in the world. It grew from that to the 1812 war, but also in the 21st century as we move forward. Maryland is open for business, and Pride helps with that.
Excellent. All right, here's a couple-part question. What do you do when you visit a foreign port, and is the purpose to generate business and tourism? And do other cities have similar types of promotion? So what do you do in the port? And do other cities have the same thing?
Well, tall ships, sure, yeah. Tall ships have draw a fascination out of everybody. You don't have to be a sailor to be fascinated with traditional sail vessels. And Pride of Baltimore is blessed with a beauty that just is draw-dropping to everybody. And the more you know about her, the more draw-dropping it gets. So she's invited to ports who are looking to have tall ship festivals. However, the basis of Pride grew out of an interest in introducing Baltimore to the world. I can tell you, having sailed her back in 1980, 81 through 85, that when we went to Europe in 85, a lot of the questions were, so where is Baltimore? Well, that was before the tall ship festivals. I can tell you with the second Pride of Baltimore, that's no longer where is Baltimore. It is how cool it is that you folks visit us. And when this was proved going into China in 1998, there was an interest in commerce development going through the port of Baltimore. And so agreements were made between the state of Maryland and the board of directors to have the vessel voyage all the way to China, among other nations. And they were so flattered to have the American effort to share American history, of which we were proud of, with them. It was a giving of face. It was a respectful gesture, and that creates conversation. And in between these two examples, there is a great deal of opportunity from tourism, from private corporations, from the Commerce Department, to preserve relationships with the opportunity to get aboard an exclusively well-known, worldwide renowned vessel, as well as to generate new relationships through invitations. Come for a day sail, like charter the boat. So it is a number of things. It's also education. We share the history with the general public. The boat earns money if it goes to a festival, but we also provide a service to Baltimore and to Maryland and the agencies and the corporations within, so far as they can leverage the identity, worldwide identity, admiration of the Pride for their own purposes in developing and preserving business relationships.
Excellent. All right, got a few more here. What weaponry could a clipper carry, and were they useful in wartime or only in trade?
Well, privateers are basically cargo vessels of the nimble, independent type that have been readopted, repurposed for the privateering war. So as citizens without a war, they would not have the right to seek a license for capturing other vessels. So it was only in a time of war that that process occurred. So the schooners of Baltimore and the Chesapeake Bay depended upon general protection through speed and agility. And they might carry some guns because you could always run into a pirate, but they weren't privateers. When they became privateers or adopted as privateers during the war, that's when they became fully armed. And a vessel the size of Pride of Baltimore II, which is similar to the size of Chasseur, is recorded to have had a crew of 150 people. Now, we're pretty crowded with 45 people, and we don't go overnight with 45 people on board, crew and passengers included. So the logistics of a privateer are you capture a boat in order to sail it back to town to turn it into cash, and it becomes investment rewards to the shares of the crew. Everybody signed on as a crew through a share process, and the senior officers had more shares, the regular folks had less shares, but they all got a share. And the African-American community actually found it was a quick way, high risk, but a very quick way to get a lot of money pretty darn quickly. And they would move inland and go north and set out their own fortunes, having won their fortune through the privateering business. So in terms of armament, a boat the size of Pride might carry 10 6-pound cannon, maybe a few 18-pounders for the really, really long-range stuff. There'd be sharpshooters on board to get up in the rig to shoot down. And also it has to be understood, they weren't going to war with the Navy. They're not the British Navy. They were only looking to get away scot-free through robbery, high seas robbery. And get this, the British cargo people didn't have Navy people on board. They weren't going to die for the cargo. So there'd be this token resistance, and then, okay, I don't want to die, so yeah, you can have the boat.
A quick follow-up to that is, did the privateers who got a boat, did they get to keep everything?
Well, if they wanted to, and there are all kinds of accounts of some boats, they would unload and put aboard their own vessel and take the people as prisoners and sometimes sink the boat. More often, they would put a number of their own crew, hence the number of 150 starts to make sense, onto a vessel, and with those people originally on the vessel and its cargo, escort that vessel to port for a proper judicial declaration of a proper capture. So over a period of time, if you were capturing a number of captures, you'd be becoming less and less crew. So you needed to have enough people to have your vessel sail fast to run away from the Navy, because the British Navy would hunt you down. And there was a risk of the Navy not respecting the letter of marque and reprisal, the license, so to speak. And they would hang you as pirates or jail you in a very, very bad place in England. So there was good reason to keep enough crew to sail really fast to run away from the Navy. But otherwise, you had to have enough crew to then leave aboard a capture to escort it to port. So it was a pretty complex business. And the Americans, and particularly the Baltimore privateers, are reputed to have captured 30% of all privateering captures, just the Baltimore boats.
Well, that makes us Baltimoreans proud. All right, we have one more question. How many knots does she sail?
Well, speed of a displacement boat or a hull form that sticks into the water is a formulaic thing, and her hull speed calculates out at around 14 or so. Because of ocean undulation, 14 knots, so a knot is 1.1 miles an hour, so it'd be upwards of 16 miles an hour. Now, undulation of the ocean can sometimes make her go faster, and then hull form, as slippery as they are, can from boat to boat can be a little less efficient or a little more efficient. So we find that Pride of Baltimore II will sail to 10 knots very easily without a lot of wind and her sail up. But getting to 12 takes a lot of work, takes a lot of power. But we have seen higher. One point, we know we were at maybe for 30 seconds to a minute at 15 knots. And that's just bragging. I mean, you're going to sail for 24 hours. You're not doing it for 15 knots, just hour after hour for day after day. That'd be just too wild and unlikely. So we have had day runs, 24-hour runs of 250 odd, 49, 50 odd miles in 24 hours. So that's a steady 10 knot, hour after hour after hour. Your sea state's going to be 10 to 12 feet. It's work.
Excellent. All right, I will call we're going to wrap up here. It is a half hour, a little more, but we try to keep it on time. There's been a robust discussion of fundraising in the chat box. Jeff Buchheit, I know you are out there somewhere. Jeff is the executive director of the nonprofit. All the funding questions, you can talk to Jeff. But take a look at the chat box, and we'll leave it up there for a second. And I just want to say thanks to Captain Miles and share one quick story about how successful I think you all are as ambassadors. In 2005, my family and I were in a bar in Baltimore, Ireland, and we got there, it was dark, and we were sitting there, and about 10 minutes later, I heard a young woman's voice saying to an older Irish woman, no, 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 you've got to get off of Pratt Street and go to Thames Street and Fells Point if you want to see some real Baltimore. And I almost got whiplash looking around, and there she was with a Pride of Baltimore shirt. And then we got up early in the morning to watch you all sail out of Baltimore, Ireland. It was a thrill. So
Great.
Thank you all. All right, thanks everybody for tuning in, and we will say thanks to a virtual thank you to the good captain and all involved, and hopefully we'll see you next Friday. All right, we're gonna sign off. Nathan's gonna cut us off here.